From London, this is Global Business.
Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Juliette Mann.
And I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories. President Xi Jinping calls on China's top tech firms and biggest entrepreneurs to show their talents in a new era for the country's businesses.
China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi holds talks with the Irish government as he continues his diplomatic tour of Europe.
European leaders gather for emergency talks on Ukraine after being excluded from discussions between the US and Russia.
And Israel's Security Cabinet is set to discuss the second phase of the Gaza ceasefire after pressure from the United States. President Xi Jinping has called on some of China's biggest entrepreneurs to show their talents in driving economic growth.
He's been meeting with senior business leaders in Beijing, including the heads of Huawei, Tencent, BYD, Xiaomi and Alibaba. President Xi said Beijing would continue to protect the rights of businesses in creating wealth and opportunity. The private sector accounts for over 50% of China's tax revenue and more than 60% of GDP. Our correspondent Yo Yang reports from Beijing.
He also points out the country's private economy has formed a considerable scale, noting that the huge market potential provided by more than 1.4 billion Chinese people will bring many new opportunities for the development of private economy. On the other hand, the Chinese leader also notes that there are some difficulties and challenges laying in front of the development of the private sectors. But he believes those challenges and difficulties appeared in the process of industrial transformation and upgrading. So he believes those challenges are temporary rather than long-term, and also they can be overcome rather than unsolvable. The Chinese leader also added that the implementation of policies to promote the development of the private sector is the current work focus. And he said China is a socialist country ruled by law, calling on relevant policies to make sure fair participation and protect the legitimate rights and the interests of private enterprises and also private entrepreneurs in accordance with the law. Well, in his speech, the Chinese leader also stressed that the enterprises are the main business entities in China and the dynamics of the private enterprises is the first priority. He's calling on the entrepreneurs to fulfill their social responsibilities in building harmonious labor relations, paying attention to environmental protections, while of course contributing more goodwill to the society.
Yo Yang reporting from Beijing. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has been holding talks with the Irish government. He's met Prime Minister Micheál Martin and Foreign Minister Simon Harris in Dublin. China is Ireland's largest trading partner in the Asia-Pacific region. Irish exports to China have increased five-fold since 2013. And let's join our correspondent Li Jianhua from Dublin. So, Jianhua, what's come out of these meetings?
Hi, Paul and Juliet. And you're right, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi had a meeting with the Deputy Prime Minister of Ireland, who is also the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Defence, Simon Harris, in the building right behind me. That's the Department of Foreign Affairs. They had a very brief conversation before Wang Yi moved to the government building to meet the Taoiseach, or the Prime Minister of Ireland. So bilateral ties were at the forefront of their discussions today. Wang Yi highlighted the diplomatic ties between the two countries, which could go back to 1979. It was the time when China started its reform and opening up. That's the time when China started to open up its market to have its economy connected to the rest of the world. And Wang noted that China-Ireland bilateral ties have been rather cordial over the past decades. And also Wang mentioned this Shannan experience. You may or may not know that the Shannan Free Zone, which was established in 1959, it was one of the world's first free zone, and it was established to attract foreign direct investment with the help of streamlined regulations and tax incentives. One said that inspired the special economic zones of China. And for his part, the Prime Minister of Ireland said that Ireland values China as a very important partner. And of course, trade is on top of the agenda, given that China is the largest trading partner of Ireland in the Asia-Pacific region, and Ireland maintains a trade surplus with China, making it one of the very few European countries to do so, with some of its key exports to China, including pharmaceuticals, medical devices, microchips and agricultural food. And of course, for China, Ireland is considered the gateway to Europe. This is especially true after Brexit, and China's investment in Ireland has been booming over the past decades. Some of the big names include Huawei, the Chinese telecom giant. The company arrived in Ireland almost 20 years ago, and now, according to the latest report, that Huawei is expected to provide about $4.7 billion between 2024 and 2030 to the Irish economy. Of course, some other Chinese companies here that are operating here include Temu, Shein, and of course TikTok. But it is not all smooth sailing. As we know, Ireland was one of the 10 EU countries that voted in favour of levying additional tariffs on Chinese-made EVs, which China strongly opposed. And also after that, China launched this anti-dumping investigation into dairy products from the EU. That's why Ireland is quite concerned about that. And today, ahead of the meeting, the Prime Minister said, I'm quoting him, Ireland wants to grow these ties sustainably based on fair competition across a wide range of sectors, including in the area of agri-food. And Wang Yi said today in the meetings that both Ireland and China are defenders of multilateralism, and China would like to work with Ireland and EU in the spirit of equality. Of course, now these two countries have more common ground than differences compared to China's relations with many other EU countries. But still, for Ireland is quite a balancing act, as the country has to strike a balance between maintaining strong economic ties with China and staying in step with EU policies. Back to you.
Jianhua, thank you so much for that. Li Jianhua, our correspondent, reporting there from Dublin.
Last year, China and Ireland marked 45 years of diplomatic relations. So let's take a look at some of the ties between the two countries. In 2023, trade between them reached new highs, hitting almost $22 billion. That's over 4,200 times the size it was in 1979.
And since 2012, Irish exports to China, including semiconductor chips and pharmaceuticals, have surged fivefold. The country is the largest overseas market for Irish pork and baby formula milk.
More than 40 Chinese enterprises are currently invested in Ireland, totalling $10 billion, and that creates more than 5,000 jobs.
Cultural ties are growing as well, with around 5,000 Chinese people studying, working and living in Ireland.
And last year, China granted visa-free entry for Irish citizens, meaning they can take advantage of Dublin's direct flights to Beijing without the need for any red tape.
Patrick McCarthy is chair of the Ireland Sino Institute.
So this is a chance for Ireland and China to renew and strengthen Ireland-China relations. And it's also Wang Yi's first visit to Ireland, especially now in the Trumpian era of uncertainty and tariffs. It's a great opportunity for them to strengthen ties, especially in trade and investment, FDI and so on. Premier Li Qiang came last year. So they attribute a lot of value to Ireland, and Premier Li Qiang visited last year, and Ireland was the only EU country visited, so it's a very important country for China.
Absolutely. And given Ireland's trade surplus with China, should there be more efforts to address that and open up trade imports?
Yeah, I think, very few have mentioned that, and I'm glad that we can mention it on this show, that Ireland has had a 14-year trade surplus with China. And 2023, they exported twice as much to China as they imported from China. So, and the level of FDI is much lower as well compared to what America invests in Ireland. So, yes, and especially as you mentioned, should we pivot? It's common sense, because especially, in the Trumpian era, one day you've got tariffs and the next day you don't, as you see with Canada and Mexico, and he could be targeting Europe soon. China represents a stable and reliable partner. So especially in this kind of era of economic uncertainty. So, and yes, I believe that Ireland should open up more and encourage more investment from China and more trade to address the imbalance, the trade imbalance.
And also with Chinese companies operating here in Europe, many actually in Dublin, along with many American companies. How important is Ireland for China as a hub for Chinese investment? And do you see that presence in Dublin growing now?
Dublin, is often called the Silicon Valley of Europe. I don't know if you've heard that one. There's 40 Chinese companies in Ireland, and a lot of them are in Dublin. IT, high-tech companies like TikTok, Shein, Huawei, and these are all headquarters. And this benefits Ireland because in terms of knowledge spillovers, technology transfer, and just learning about high-tech development. And obviously it brings jobs, it adds to the public funds, and it's great for the people on the ground, the disadvantaged. The 1 million suffering from a housing crisis in Ireland, a cost of living crisis. So you've got to think about people on the ground. So China is a country which helps its people and the people of other nations. I think Ireland should open up more and attract more investment, more trade to equalise the relationship. But Ireland also serves as a very important partner, as a balancing partner. It's able to maintain relations with many countries without bias. It's a neutral country, it's not part of NATO. So it's a trustworthy partner from China's perspective. And China, what's in it for, why is Wang Yi going to, going back to that question, why is he going to Ireland? Because he hopes that Ireland will advocate for China's cause in Europe,
The European Union imposed tariffs on Chinese-made electric vehicles at the end of October. Chinese car makers continue investing and selling their latest models across the continent. Our correspondent Ken Brown reports from Dublin.
The XPeng G6 Coupe, an electric SUV that can accelerate from 0 to 100 in 6.7 seconds and reaches 570 kilometers on a single charge. Packed with AI tech taking us closer to autonomous driving, it's now available in Ireland at this shiny new showroom in Dublin.
We've actually called for more stock. We had orders put in last week because of the volume that we sold over the last week. So 1 week opens, the weekend we sold 12 XPengs, and now we've more cars on order and they're on their way from China as we speak. So it's really good times for XPeng in Ireland.
XPeng might only be 10 years old, but this Chinese disruptor is a small car maker with big ambitions, plans to roll out sales in over 60 countries. And this model, the XPeng G6 Coupe, is a direct rival for the Tesla Model Y. The Model Y was the best-selling car on the planet in 2023, a first for an electric car, and stayed a bestseller in 2024 too. Now, XPeng is trying to compete on better tech as standard features like the AI-powered autonomous driving capabilities and a price tag that's around $10,000 lighter. The company's investment in Ireland is also a clear sign that EU EV tariffs are not stopping the Chinese electric car rollout.
Not really. The tariffs, people are just looking, is it good value? Is the vehicle itself, has the range, has the size, can I fit the kids in it, can the dog fit in the boot? Now it's CPUs this and AI that and voice assistant, and the Chinese cars just have it all, and the European manufacturers are kind of playing catch up to all of that kind of what consumers are actually looking for. Tariffs are driving more innovation, but also I think the Chinese manufacturers have optimised real lean manufacturing, and they could probably, taking that tariff in, the ability to soak that in and still have a competitively priced vehicle that European customers and Irish customers are happy to pay for.
Last month, Ireland sold more electric cars than any month before, and worldwide some 20 million electric and plug-in hybrids are expected to shift this year. Chinese innovators and disruptors like XPeng are still very much part of that conversation. Ken Brown, CGTN, Dublin.
And still ahead here on Global Business Europe, President Trump says his authority has been assaulted as he asks the Supreme Court for permission to fire the head of a government agency.
Do you have any questions?
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with global business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
For China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us. And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliette Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
You might think you are better informed in an information age. The fact is, people are more often misled by misinformation. You might think every voice is heard in a digital world. The fact is, many nations and peoples are still underrepresented. And data poverty shuts out many. We at CGTN are committed to transcending the information gap and the digital divide. CGTN, bridging nations and civilizations. CGTN, see the difference.
Hello there, welcome back. US President Donald Trump is asking the Supreme Court for permission to fire the head of an independent ethics agency.
Hampton Dellinger heads up the US Office of Special Counsel, which protects government employees who report wrongdoing. He sued the Trump administration after being fired in a single-line email earlier this month. Since taking office, President Trump has sacked thousands of federal government staff in what he says is an attempt to boost efficiency. Our correspondent Mitch McCann is in New York. Great to see you, Mitch. Now, look, this is the first of the many sackings to face a high-level legal challenge. Tell us more.
Yeah, that's certainly right. This is the first time in Donald Trump's second term, though, that he has asked the nation's highest court, the Supreme Court, to help the White House in its attempts to shrink the size of the federal government. It's been reported that his administration is asking the Supreme Court to allow it to fire the head of the government agency which is dedicated to protecting government employees who become whistleblowers. Now, Hampton Dellinger is the head of the Office of the Special Counsel. He argues that he was fired and it was unlawful because he can only be dismissed from his role due to performance, and no such issue was highlighted when he received that one-line email a few weeks ago telling him he was being terminated. Now, a federal judge in Washington already issued a temporary order allowing him to keep his job while this case proceeds, and last weekend an appeals court rejected Donald Trump's request to block that order, which is why the White House has now elevated this case to the Supreme Court. Now, it argues that allowing the courts to issue rulings that go against the president's decisions, quote, will irreparably harm the presidency by curtailing the president's ability to manage the executive branch in the earliest days of his administration. It's also important to note the court has a conservative majority. Donald Trump appointed 3 of the justices sitting on this court, so he's going to be hoping for a favourable ruling here.
And a federal court's hearing arguments on another Doge-related case today. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's right. Well, Doge is facing a number of lawsuits across the country, including one that's going to be heard today in Washington, despite it being a public holiday, President's Day, here in the US. Now, this is a case that's been backed by more than a dozen attorneys generals from Democratic-leaning states. What they are arguing is that Elon Musk has the sort of power in the US government that can only be given to someone who has not just been nominated by the president, but has also been confirmed by the Senate, which, of course, Elon Musk hasn't. Initially, Musk oversaw the federal buyout scheme where employees were offered to be paid the annual salary until September this year if they resign now. It's reported more than 65,000 people took that up. But there's also reports of widespread mass layoffs since across all departments, something these attorneys general are hoping they can hold. Now, on Friday, the same federal judge in Washington heard arguments from 13 of them, where they argue that Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency should be barred from accessing information government departments, this sort of sensitive information. They've also asked that it must be stopped from firing members of the federal government for at least a couple of weeks while they make a permanent representation to the judge. Now, this is getting very confusing because there's judges that have also blocked attempts to shut down the USAID. Another has blocked Doge's access to sensitive information. But it's not all bad news for this government efficiency department. Another judge has ruled they can access data from 3 other federal agencies. So it's getting very confusing as all these Doge cases head to the courts. But of course, that one that's going to be heard possibly from the US Supreme Court now too.
I mean, as you say, Mitch, it all is very confusing and very complicated. What's it going to mean, though, for the day-to-day? Is it going to hold up legal processes? And who wins in that situation?
Well, in some of these cases, the attorneys general, for example, in the case I just mentioned, they're trying to seek a delay to Doge's actions for about 2 weeks. So in terms of day-to-day changes, it will mean that Doge can't access some of the sensitive information or fire federal employees for 2 weeks if the judge sides with them. But they'll have to make a more of a long-term order, so this is permanent for Doge. Then we've got the other issue where they're looking at whether or not Elon Musk should have any authority, or as much authority as he has at the moment. So there is this argument from Democrats and many on the political left here in the United States that Donald Trump is simply ignoring what's legal and what's not. He's just hoping to, make an order and then they'll play it out in the courts at the end of the day. Some of these things that he's been doing, I know one where he fired these inspectors general. The law says that he was supposed to have written reasons for this, but he didn't, and now that will go to the courts too. So the argument is that Donald Trump is simply firing people, even though in some cases it's not legal, but then he's just going to argue it in the courts anyway. But there are so many cases going on, it's getting very confusing, and for some I can imagine it would be very hard to keep following this.
Mitch McGann in New York, thank you very much.
The world's largest electric vehicle battery maker, CATL, is expanding the workforce at its main European production centre in Germany. The Chinese company eventually hopes the factory in Thuringen will be able to supply European manufacturers with enough batteries to power up to 350,000 EVs each year. Our correspondent Natalie Carney reports.
Germany has long been a pivotal force in the global car industry, renowned as the birthplace of the automobile. With the drive towards greener mobility, Germany wants to stay on track and wants more manufacturers to build factories and advance domestic electric vehicle production. China's CATL, the world's largest battery supplier, has set up shop in the German state of Thuringen.
As a Chinese-based company, why did CATL decide to invest here in Germany?
Yes, battery making business is something that you do very close with your customers. It's an eye-to-eye thing.
Right.
And it's important to have the short supply chains in the long term. We have had our first cooperation here in Germany starting in 2012. And then we decided to come here and start producing batteries in Germany and in Europe in 2018.
Batteries account for around 40% of the price of an electric vehicle. Local production will cut costs and reduce transportation emissions. It also brings more jobs.
So how has then the CATL factory here in Germany helped develop not only Germany's EV manufacturing industry, but also Europe's?
Well, we're bringing a lot of new know-how here into the region. Battery manufacturing is still quite a new subject in Europe. And that also comes with some added benefits. We're also helping train people on the ground for future generations of battery production here on site.
EV technology is key to the decarbonation of road transport. But with not enough European battery producers to satisfy demand, Germany and other EU countries appear to be open to Chinese investment.
This plant aims to build hundreds of thousands of EV batteries for electric vehicles across the continent and beyond, which will go to help the European Union's growing electric vehicle manufacturing industry, which has long relied on batteries from China that are now subject to EU tariffs.
Many in Germany view these EU tariffs as detrimental, but some argue that the tariffs now incentivize more Chinese investment in building European production centers, like this one in Thuringen. Natalie Carney, CGTN, Arnstadt, Thuringen.
Shares in Chinese tech giant Tencent have surged to their highest level in 4 years after the company adopted DeepSeek's enhanced AI capabilities on its WeChat social media platform. Tencent is exploring the integration of artificial intelligence across several sectors. It joins a host of government bodies and service providers embracing DeepSeek's software across China.
Meanwhile, shares in Tencent's rival Baidu fell by around 8%, wiping more than $2 billion off the company's value. It came as the tech giant announced that it would adopt DeepSeek AI after Tencent had already done so. Investors also noted the absence of Baidu's founder at those talks in Beijing between business leaders and President Xi Jinping.
Japan's GDP grew by 0.7% in the fourth quarter, beating expectations. The rise was driven by a jump in exports, while domestic demand was a drag on growth, contracting marginally. It comes after the central bank put up interest rates last month to their highest level since 2008.
You're watching CGTN, still ahead. We're in Paris, where European leaders have gathered for crisis talks on Ukraine.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Peking opera, or Jinju, is a classic form of Chinese performance art, combining the music of Chinese instruments, costume, face painting, literature, and history. It arose in Beijing over 200 years ago during the Mid-Qing dynasty. There are four main characters: the Sheng, who are gentlemen, Dan, who are women, Jing, who are men of strong character, and Chou, who are clowns. Each character has a different age, gender, and social status. Performers use four main skills, namely song, speech, dance acting, and combat. And the highest aim of performers is to put beauty into every motion. Today, Peking opera is regarded as a quintessential form of Chinese culture.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Paul Barber and me, Juliet Mann. Our top story again. President Xi Jinping calls on China's top tech firms and biggest entrepreneurs to show their talents in a new era for the country's businesses. Professor Hong Bo is the AXA Chair in Global Finance at SOAS University of London.
It's a very significant signal. I think business people, they care a lot about policy uncertainties. So it shows that, the relationship between the Chinese government and the private sector is now improving, so that the uncertainty of doing business will be reduced. So I think that is very important to attract more private businesses.
How far do you think this will go to improving investor and consumer sentiment too, and ultimately stoke that economic growth?
Yes, I think as you already mentioned that the private sector has been playing a very important role. And but in the past a few years, we saw the declining of the private sector activities, so that hurts the confidence of the domestic public. So I think this meeting actually sends out a message that can boost public confidence in the private sector, because the government has shown that the government is going to support the private sector in the near future. So I think that will lead to much more market-driven activities, economic activities, and that can also promote domestic consumption.
Yeah. Let's talk about who was in the room, because some big names were there, but should we take anything from the fact that some heads of China's household name businesses were not there?
I would not really worry about the individual people who are there, but as far as I can see, this is a gathering of the head of very big tech firms in China, and many of them are international players. So I think we should see the general direction in which that the private sector is going, with more support from the Chinese government.
There is renewed interest, isn't there, in China's tech sector with all the breakthrough of AI pioneer DeepSeek. What other business success stories are getting the markets excited, would you say?
Yeah, that's a very good example. I think the meeting took place, this week, and after a couple of weeks after DeepSeek release of the new product, and this is very encouraging, a good moment. It shows that the Chinese government is actually very confident in the capacity of the Chinese tech sector in terms of the international competition. In terms of other businesses, if you can think about what China is leading at the moment, think about the green technologies, and think about everything that is related to digital transformation and also AI application. So, in many countries in the global south, actually they do not need the most advanced technologies, but they need the application side. And China is very good in this respect.
European leaders are holding an emergency summit in Paris to discuss the Russia-Ukraine conflict. It comes as US and Russian officials prepare to hold their own meeting in Saudi Arabia, with European nations excluded. Those talks and President Trump's recent phone call with Vladimir Putin are sparking fears in Europe that a deal will be struck which could undermine Kiev and the broader security of the continent. French President Emmanuel Macron says he spoke to Donald Trump shortly before the meeting got underway at the Elysee Palace. Our correspondent Ross Cullen is in Paris for us now with more on this. Hi there, Ross. So this meeting is happening as we speak. What more can you tell us?
Yeah, we don't have a readout yet, Paul, of the contents of the conversation between Emmanuel Macron and Donald Trump, but it would be fascinating to get that eventually from the Elysee and the White House to see to what impact that conversation might have led the discussions that have been taking place this afternoon, that are ongoing right now between the government leaders of the United Kingdom, Germany, Italy, Spain, Poland, the Netherlands and Denmark, along with NATO. The EU also represented at these talks, being hosted by the French president, scrambling all weekend, these European leaders, to try to come to an agreement on holding this summit, to try to deal with the ongoing fallout on European defence and security from the evolving positions of the new administration in the United States. So we've been hearing from a few of the leaders on their way in to the summit a short time ago. We can listen in now to a little bit more of what the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer had to say.
This isn't just about the front line in Ukraine, it's the front line of Europe and of the United Kingdom. It's about our national security, and I think that we need to do more. We need to step up in terms of our collective response in Europe. And by that I mean capability, by that I mean playing our full part when it comes to the defence of the sovereignty of Ukraine if there's a peace agreement.
So you heard there from Keir Starmer mentioning the words front line, and that is what a lot of the European leaders want to remind people, that this is a war which has been ongoing since 2014 when Russia first supported pro-Russia separatists in eastern Ukraine. This has been 11 years of war. People are still fighting and dying on both sides every day, the battle for territory. And that idea, though, that is at the forefront of European leaders' minds, really focusing those leaders that there could be European troops patrolling a potential demilitarized zone if one were to be set up in the aftermath of any possible agreement between Kiev and Moscow, and really the seriousness of having Western boots on the ground inside Ukraine, even for peacekeeping purposes. A very serious matter that is being discussed this afternoon.
And so, Ross, what more do we know about that? We did hear from Keir Starmer earlier in the day about British troops on the ground, peacekeepers. Are other European nations also committing to that?
Yeah, well, Paul, you might remember in February last year, President Macron said that having Western boots on the ground was not being ruled out. That idea of maintaining strategic ambiguity, leaving everything on the table to leave yourself as many possible options as you might have available to you to continue to support your ally, as Europe has been doing for Ukraine since the start of the full-scale invasion in 2022. So the idea that having Western boots on the ground, suggested by Emmanuel Macron in 2024, but there was immediate criticism and pushback, notably from Germany, that said that that was not an idea that was going to go anywhere. Well, 1 year later, we're speaking about it very seriously. Sweden today said that they are not ruling out sending Swedish troops into Ukraine to support any broader peacekeeping mission. However, the Spanish representatives here at today's summit did say that we can't speak about deploying troops just yet, because they could only be deployed once there has been a peace agreement signed, and we are still so far away from seeing any such peace settlement.
OK, Ross, thank you very much for that. That's Ross Cullen, our Paris correspondent.
Comfort Iro is president of the International Crisis Group. She spoke to CGTN about why it's important for Europe to step up to protect Ukraine.
We expected some kind of negotiation, and that Trump would reach out to Putin. He'd indicated this in his election campaign, so there was no surprise for us when he announced that he had this phone call with Putin, and that we always said that the two leaders are likely to talk, but what was clear for Europe was to make sure that you're at the table in some way, that this is about the European security architecture, that whatever is decided in relation to Ukraine would have an impact in Europe, and that Europe needed to step up and lean into its own multilateral architecture as well. I mean, to be fair, Europe has already started thinking about its own defence industrial base. It's already thinking about how it's going to use its money to underwrite the necessary assistance that Ukraine needs for itself. Yes, this has been a wake-up call.
Russia's foreign minister says there is no possibility of conceding territory to Ukraine in peace talks to end the conflict. Sergei Lavrov is heading to Saudi Arabia to meet US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Russia controls large areas of Ukraine after capturing them in 2014 and 2022. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says Kiev won't be involved in the discussions. He's visiting the United Arab Emirates, which has brokered large prisoner swaps between the two sides. Our correspondent Nadia Swan is in Dubai.
So he has said absolutely that there is no question of Russia giving up any territory that it's taken from Ukraine over the last several years, and that's actually 20% of Ukraine's territory. So, you know, quite a strong opening to those negotiations. He's also, another key demand that Lavrov has laid down is that Ukraine give up any ambitions to join NATO, and of course that was something that President Zelensky has wanted to to ensure Ukraine's security for the future as well. Now, Lavrov has also dismissed any idea, as your correspondent was saying earlier, about basically the Europeans having a seat at the negotiating table, which has left European leaders somewhat on the back foot and scrambling for some sort of response to that. And they are meeting right now, as you say, to consider how they're going to deal with this Russia and US meeting that's taking place in Saudi Arabia at the moment. And one other thing that Lavrov was keen to also say was he poured cold water on the suggestion that Ukraine may offer the United States access to rare minerals in exchange for getting more US support and concessions for what Ukraine wants to see in the way of a peace deal.
Iran has defended its nuclear program after the United States and Israel said Tehran's nuclear ambitions must be stopped. The US Secretary of State Marco Rubio also accused Iran of causing instability in the Middle East by backing groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. Iran denies that it instructs its proxies to attack and insists it's enriching uranium for peaceful purposes.
Officials from Afghanistan's Taliban government have arrived in Japan on their first diplomatic trip to East Asia. The delegation is expected to ask for humanitarian support and stronger ties during the week-long visit. Japan recently reopened its embassy in Kabul, and the Taliban says the trip is aimed at establishing Afghanistan as an active member of the international community.
Rebels in the Democratic Republic of the Congo have reached the centre of the strategic eastern city of Bukavu 2 days after breaching the outskirts. The provincial governor confirmed that Congolese troops had withdrawn. Fighters from the M23 movement captured the region's largest city of Goma last month and now hold more territory than at any time since the end of the Second Congo War in 2003. Israel's Security Cabinet is meeting to discuss the second phase of the Gaza ceasefire after pressure from the United States.
A negotiating team is also in Cairo for talks on Phase 1 as Israel marks 500 days since its hostages were taken by Hamas. The Palestinian group has again accused Israel of breaching the truce by launching an airstrike in Gaza on Sunday, which killed 3 people and blocked the delivery of temporary shelters. Our correspondent Jonathan Regev reports from Tel Aviv.
We know there's a lot of pressure coming from the Israeli public and from the United States to continue with the agreement. The Israeli public is very happy to see every week 3 more hostages coming back, and there's a lot of pressure to continue with this agreement, maybe even speed it up to make sure that all of the hostages come back, regardless of the very heavy price that Israel is paying. On the other hand, there are members of the Security Cabinet, members of Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition, who do not want to go to that direction simply because on paper the second phase means the end of the war, means the withdrawal of Israeli forces. This is something that some members of the coalition do not want to see. Therefore, a big question as to what will happen out of the Security Cabinet. As you mentioned, Paul, an Israeli delegation is in Cairo for the moment with the mandate to speak only about the implementation of the first phase, nothing to deal with the second stage, which should begin roughly 2 weeks from now. Of course, depending on the outcome of this meeting of the Security Cabinet, that mandate may be extended. But for the moment, everybody is waiting to see what comes out of that Security Cabinet. A very important meeting. Seems as if Israel is finally getting a kickstart on the negotiations on the second stage of the ceasefire.
And meanwhile, Jonathan, the hostage families are keeping up the pressure, aren't they? We can see the posters there behind you.
Yes, the families are keeping the pressure, especially on this day, which marks 500 days since the beginning of the war, 500 days in which 73 hostages are still in captivity, and therefore there are a lot of events happening today. For example, the Israeli public has been urged to fast for 500 minutes to commemorate the 500 days in which the hostages are still being captive, and later on in the day today there will be assemblies, large gatherings both in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem, possibly in other places. The families want to make sure that the agreement is kept, that 3 more hostages keep coming out in the first stage, and that the second stage is implemented. There's a lot of concern that Israel will eventually go back to war before the ceasefire actually expires and before all of the hostages come back. The families are very much worried, and that is why they're keeping the pressure, even upping the pressure on the government, trying to make sure that the ceasefire agreement is actually kept and things are actually happening and all of the hostages are eventually returned.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, wet wheat and what to do about it. British farmers say unpredictable weather is making it harder to grow cereals.
Chinese calligraphy, or Shufa, is a traditional visual art form that involves writing Chinese characters in a stylized way. It is thought to have originated alongside the earliest Chinese characters discovered to date, namely oracle bone inscriptions from the Shang dynasty, that's 16th to 11th century BC, in Anyang, Henan province. There are 5 major styles of script: regular, 楷书, running, 行书, cursive, 草书, clerical, 隶书, and seal, 篆书. 4 essential pieces of equipment are used: brush, 笔, ink, 墨, paper, 纸, and inkstone, 砚. Collectively, these are known as the 4 treasures of the study. From brush inclination and direction to the speed of writing, every twist and turn of the wrist is calculated. Today, Chinese calligraphy is a highly valued traditional art form, for it is more than just writing. It is a living heritage.
Welcome back. The Indian government says it's developing new crowd control plans after 18 people were killed in a stampede at a railway station in New Delhi on Saturday.
The crash happened as passengers tried to board trains heading to the world's largest religious gathering. Our correspondent Ravinder Bauer reports.
Vlogger Shivam Shukla had no idea that a shopping trip to New Delhi would turn into a tragedy. On Saturday night, his friend was killed in the stampede at city's main railway station.
I had to go to platform number 13, but there was such a huge crowd that I was pushed all the way to platform 15. It was so crowded that I was dragged along and fell down. My friend also fell, but he tried to save me. He lost his life in doing that.
Authorities say the incident took place as crowds of passengers, among them Hindu pilgrims, were waiting to board trains to Prayagraj to attend the annual Mahakumbh religious festival. They say the bodies of those who died, including women and children, have been handed over to their families. Dozens of injured people are being treated at a government hospital.
The train had arrived and someone trying to get on pushed my mom from the back. She fell into the gap between the platform and the coach. She was dragged along by the moving train and hurt her back badly.
Indian Railways has announced compensation for the victims, and an inquiry has been ordered into the incident. Authorities say 4 special trains were dispatched to evacuate thousands of people from Delhi railway station.
Experts say that the railway infrastructure in India is overburdened and India needs many new greenfield railway stations. Ravinder Bauer, CGTN, Delhi.
UK wheat yields fell 20% last year as crops were hit by record rainfall and flooding. Farmers say that the weather is becoming more unpredictable, making it harder to plan ahead. Our correspondent Kitty Logan reports.
Winter wheat should be growing in this field. Instead, it's a sea of mud.
October, when we normally sow this wheat, was so wet that we just didn't get a chance to put it in. So this field is just remaining bare all winter.
That means more losses for this family farm after their yield sunk by a third last year.
Well, this field is a business asset, so it's not earning us any money. If all our fields are empty, we can't run a farm because we're not getting any income. So it's really important that we have as many crops growing as we can.
Extreme weather in 2024 left much of Britain's farmland unworkable.
The very wet conditions often make planting very difficult because the tractors cause too much damage on the fields and you get smearing of the soils and the seed doesn't go into a good seed bed to get a good start in life.
Soaked fields cause poor crop growth, long-term soil damage and can ruin planting.
For the last 2 years we've had really wet autumns and that's the time of year we plant most of our crops. So it's really wet then, we can't get the crops in the ground and therefore we miss out on crop potential yield.
Last winter was England's wettest on record. At this Cotswolds farm, flooding wiped out an entire winter wheat crop. And now, low wheat prices are keeping grain in storage. Some analysts say 2025 could be better, but farmers aren't so sure.
While 2024 was such a poor year for crop production, there is some hope that this year could be better. But of course, the weather is still so uncertain and it's difficult to predict just how much better the yield might be.
Many farmers are open to adapting to the changing climate, using regenerative practices to withstand wet conditions.
Hopefully farming methods we can improve constantly and improve the quality of our soil, which will make us more resilient in the long run. But that's quite a long-term goal, so we've just got to take small steps in that direction.
Farmers can also plant different crops at other times or apply for government incentives to help the environment.
When you have more carbon in the soils, it helps absorb more water during a high rainfall event, but it also holds on to water better during a drought event.
But the alternatives are less profitable, so the hope is the weather is kinder to this year's crop. Kitty Logan, CGTN, Buckinghamshire.
South African wool has warmed a sweet spot in the Chinese market. Every year, the country produces around 45 million kilos, most of which is bought by China. Our correspondent Julie Shiro reports from Cape Town.
South Africa is one of the world's largest wool producers. The high-quality fibre is exported to the Czech Republic, Italy, Egypt and Bulgaria. But China, the world's biggest buyer of wool, remains South Africa's top market.
Our total production combined is around about 48 million kilograms, so around about 85% on an annual basis of that goes to China. So by far the biggest portion of the South African clip goes to China for further processing.
The signing of the Greasy Wool Protocol at last year's Forum on China-Africa Cooperation is expected to boost relations further. The agreement eases some measures to allow for smoother flow of raw wool from South Africa to China.
What China has done, which is, I think, leading the way for the rest of the world to now follow, is they've agreed to compartmentalize the country. In the past, when there was a foot-and-mouth outbreak in the Eastern Cape, it shut down the entire wool meat industry and exports completely. What we've now agreed with through these protocols is to compartmentalize the country.
Because we have excellent traceability in South Africa back to the farm of origin and to a magisterial district, that enables us to comply with those export regulations. So whether it's exclusion of a specific compartment, as you say, or time and temperature protocols as required by China and some other countries.
Farmers heavily reliant on exports for their survival have welcomed the move.
For our type of wool, it's essential that we have China, as a market. Yeah, but there is definitely potential in other countries for wool as well. We produce around about 2 tons of wool per year, and I would say it's about at least 80% of it gets exported to China.
Over 53,000 commercial and communal farmers drive South Africa's thriving wool industry. With trade relations with China on an upward trajectory, the future looks promising. Despite challenges like rising input costs and fluctuating global prices, the industry remains resilient. Julie Shara, CGTN, Cape Town.
Now, train travel may be a greener way to get from point A to point B, but it's often hampered by extreme weather events.
Well, now, manufacturers, including China's biggest train maker, are using the world's largest wind tunnel to weatherproof their designs. Our correspondent Johannes Pleschberger reports from Vienna.
At very low temperatures, rubber components get stiff and break apart. Entire electronic systems can fail too.
One part of our rain system, here we are controlling the water flow and can let it rain or make an ice rain as well.
Gabriel Haller is the mastermind behind the world's only climatic wind tunnel that can fit an entire train. One click is enough to lower the temperature to minus 45 degrees Celsius or increase the wind speed to 250 kilometers per hour.
We do not have to wait for the next extreme winter. We can simulate it. We are guiding the air through a fan downstream then to the test section, and there we are testing the test objects.
China's state-owned train manufacturer CRRC has been using the Viennese wind tunnel for over 10 years, most recently to test the windscreen wipers of its Bison locomotive. The multiple voltage freight train, which can operate on different countries' rail tracks, is to begin running in Hungary soon. It will be operated by a subsidiary of Austrian Railways.
CRRC has big plans for Europe's competitive railway market. After basing its continental headquarters here in Vienna, China's biggest train producer has bought a locomotive production site in Germany and is now test driving its Bison train in Hungary, ready for operation across Central and Eastern Europe.
In 2023, CRRC and Vienna's RTA wind tunnel signed a memorandum of understanding to intensify future joint research.
The research cooperation with CRRC is dealing with snow and ice accumulation on certain components. And we can validate their research activities by doing real tests.
In extreme weather, the proper functioning of pantographs, the train top apparatus which collects power from an overhead line, can prevent delays and line failures. Vehicle tests like the ones in the Austrian capital are essential not just for reliability, but also for safety during adverse weather conditions. Johannes Pleschberger, CGTN, Vienna.
And we just need to bring you some breaking news before we leave you. An Israeli security official says the country is preparing to receive the bodies of 4 hostages from Gaza on Thursday and is working on bringing back 6 living hostages on Saturday.
Now, if those 2 handovers are successful, only 4 hostages, all presumed dead, would remain in Gaza. That's out of the 33 due to be released in the first phase of the ceasefire agreement. A reminder of your headlines. President Xi Jinping calls on China's top tech firms and biggest entrepreneurs to show their talents in a new era for the country's businesses.
China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi holds talks with the Irish government as he continues his diplomatic tour of Europe.
And European leaders meet for emergency talks on Ukraine after being excluded from discussions between the US and Russia.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.
Bye-bye.